I don't fit in anywhere. This odd person that's not Amish anymore, but I'm also not English. It made me so vulnerable and so susceptible to someone coming to me. That's when I met this woman. I felt that sense that she gets me. We understood the Bible in a way that other people didn't. And so again, there was this elitist mentality that I also had that was prevalent in the Amish culture. We are so sorry that you don't know what we know. We had information that other people needed to know, and God had a special plan for us in that way. In order to be this person, this is what you have to do. We didn't have a lot of income, but we were giving 30% of our income to the church.
Whoa.
And plus still cooking all this food on our own dime. I didn't know that there was a structure supposed to be in place that had a level of accountability. There was none of that in this church. There was no board. He made all the decisions. He kept all the money, and he really used his platform as an international televangelist to lure people into the church and to build credibility for himself from that aspect. And so there was a lot of fear to speak against him. He even said that God told him things that we said in our own bedrooms and in our own homes, and that nothing was kept secret from him, that God was going to tell him that we said these things.
Whoa.
And oh my gosh, the fear, the terror that I felt. You said he's a liar.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, babe, don't say that.
You're like, shh, he can hear
God's
us.
going to show him, right?
Ooh. Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd like to join us over on YouTube, that would be amazing at Cults to Consciousness. You can join in the conversation. We love seeing those words of encouragement for our guests who are coming on and bravely sharing their stories. They are real people. They do read the comments, and we have such an amazing community here who leaves the nicest things. So thank you so much for doing that. And of course, interacting with the post in any way also helps the algorithm so more people see it. Today's guests, plural, we did an episode with the wife already, and I realized there was just so much I wanted to know about her husband's journey as well and how they converged. So basically, she grew up in an Amish, old order Amish settlement, and we talk in the first episode about all of the struggles that she went through, how she escaped, and then she was brought back, and then how she escaped again, running through cornfields. Harrowing story. I was on the edge of my seat. And then we land in another cult. And she's like, and that's where I met my husband. And he grew up Amish. And I was like, hold on. So we knew that we needed to come back and do a follow-up episode. Feel free to watch that one after this one. You don't have to watch that one first if you don't want to. We'll fill in some blanks here on this episode. So thank you so much for joining us, Lucy and Luke Koblenz.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was very happy, Luke, when you agreed to come on and do a double episode because I knew that there had to be a story there. So I think let's start with you, Luke, and your family. You were born and raised Amish, and then you left at 18. So what are some standout moments that you can remember from your childhood and your experience growing up Amish?
Yeah, so totally. We were old order Amish. I came from a family of 13 kids. So,
Wow.
Right in the middle, you feel like you kind of get lost in the middle of it all, right? So we moved a lot. I found it is hard for me to connect with good people and not to disconnect because we moved so much. My dad became a minister when I was about 5 years old, which is a crazy story in itself. Seeing him on the bench weeping because it's not something he wanted to do made a huge impact, right? He's just like bawling at the top of his lungs kind of thing, like his whole body is shaking, right? It's not something he wanted to be, become a minister, but he did become a minister. And I think he did great at it because he loved the Bible, right? Studied a lot. But we moved a lot. So I just learned how to disconnect from friends. We're friends and like, all right, we're gone the next day and everything's cool. No worries. Just move on and make new ones, right? So I have lived in communities where there's no motors. You're out there pushing that old reel mower, a perfectly good running tractor. We just hitched up a team of horses to pull it into position as a power unit, outside plumbing. So we grew up with all that, right? And then moving to a different community where we just kind of taped up the light switches, pretend they don't work. We of course had church in our homes occasionally. So, but in between that, you just take the tape off and you use it. So that was really cool, right? Huge change up from one community to another. So, kind of the whole spectrum of conveniences, the lack thereof, and then having everything.
What was it like for you emotionally? So it sounds like you did a lot of manual labor, which seems to be common in the Amish communities, especially as a young boy. So how was it for you growing up? Do you remember enjoying it or hating it?
Yeah, there were some jobs that I enjoyed, but weeding the cornfields where the roads are endless, and I hated those jobs, right? I feel like when our family was working together, it was fun because we had a blast, pulling the weeds in the garden all together, or doing the haying, or the community gathering to do the wheat harvest or the corn harvest. That was a lot of fun. So totally I did not work as hard as Lucy did growing up. My dad was a lot more gentle on us, and we did have every Saturday afternoon as he's preparing a sermon. Us kids were loose to go run in the woods and play and just have lots of fun.
Mm. Oh, that's great to hear that you had a different upbringing that was not so traumatic as we were
Yeah,
talking about with
for
Lucy's
sure.
upbringing. So something must have happened though for your entire family to leave the Amish because that's very uncommon.
Yeah, it was. So it seemed like Dad was always getting into trouble somehow with whatever church we were in, and he was always. It was embarrassing because we were always the family that during communion we were outside. We couldn't sit in on it, or if they were having a meeting after church to try to work through stuff, my dad was usually the cause of that.
Hmm.
And so we moved. So I remember, Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Montana. We lived in all those states. We moved back to Michigan, and crazy story. The community, although they were Amish, they engaged a lot with outside connections. Like Englishers would come in all the time, right? They'd have prayer meetings and Bible studies, and that was great. I think what really happened is we felt some of the freedom in that church, and then they pulled back and said, no, we need to stay Amish. That's our mission. And so get rid of all the tape players, get rid of the musical instruments, get rid of, really tone everything down. And the control really, when that happened, it was like, nah, we're done. We're out. And my dad had several friends outside the church that were support and encouragement. He's like, no, I'm done. We're leaving.
Okay.
So yeah, I was one of the guys. It was really hard for me because I saw my dad. I felt like he was sometimes the source of this division in the church, and I judged him for it. So I would have been the kid that would stay and follow the rules and think that, well, I'm pleasing God, right? So thank God I had some outside connections as well that said, no, I think it's good for you to move away from this, right?
Yeah.
It was more of a second generation leaving, right? It wasn't just myself facing the cruel world alone, right? It was the whole family. So sort of a support system around us.
That's interesting. I want to get your opinion on this because I wonder if it's just total coincidence that you maybe had a more positive experience because your dad was a little bit more rebellious and not so stringent with the rules. Do you think that had any part to play in it, or do you think it is possible to just have a happy upbringing?
Yeah, I think that is it. He may have been, he never was a stickler to all those rules. I thought we followed the rules of the church, very strictly, but looking back now and hearing Lucy's experience, yeah, my experience was different. It was still ultimately the bishop was the authority, right? He was still almost like head over our household, right? It's like our parents weren't really the final authority in our household. It was the bishop, right? So yes, if something happened, like I got a haircut before we even left the home, my dad was confronted on it, and it's like, all right, who's my parent, the bishop or my dad, right?
Right. So you said that you had conflicting feelings because your dad is the source of this contention in the community, and you left when you were 18. So what prevented you from just staying, getting married, and continuing on the Amish path?
So I think that I did really want the freedom. I had seen some freedom in the church we were in, and I saw them pull back, and I felt that sense of bondage. So I think in my heart, I really did want, and honestly, as a kid, I used to dream of driving a car, right? That was a big
Mm,
deal. And so leaving is like, whoa, I'll have a freedom to drive a car. Might be okay. It might not be like sin for me to do this. So of course that's exciting.
yeah. So did all 13 of your siblings leave, or did any of them stay behind?
So two of them stayed behind. They have since left. But yeah, one brother was living in another state already married, and another sister left home and went back to marry her Amish fiance.
Mm, so interesting. And maybe one day we can do a whole episode with you. So let's get to the part where both of you meet. So on Lucy's first episode, we had just heard this crazy escape story. She finally makes it to her brother's house, and that's when I was like, okay, let's just stop here and we need to bring it back up, pick it up again. So we hear all about this second cult that you both joined that we would say is a fanatical, independent church run by this man who took things to the extreme. I think, Lucy, you mentioned to me off camera that it reminded you a lot of the 7M cult.
Hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk about how you both got involved in this church.
Yeah. So Luke and I met in the Amish church that he was describing, that he and his family left from. My family moved to this church. We moved from Indiana to Michigan, where this community was. And my dad's cousin was the bishop. And so when we moved in, the church had already moved towards being a lot more strict again. And there's rumors that my family was part of the reason that that happened because of where we were coming from. And the church there believed that we were lost. I don't know if you remember me telling you in the last episode that our church was kind of the armpit of Amish, in a sense that we were
Mm.
looked down upon by other Amish communities because we did wild things like drinking and smoking and partying, other things as well. And so, which was not common practice in the church that we moved to. And so when we came in, they were being a lot more strict. And that's when I met Luke's family. And then 2 years later, they all left. So I did not personally know Luke or connect with him at that point, but I knew his sisters. And then I moved away. When I ran away from home, I moved to another state. And about 3 years later, I came back and I met him at this church.
Mhm. I have to be honest though, literally the first day I saw Lucy when her family came to church, I was smitten by her. I mean, she was probably
Aw.
13, 14 years old, right? And I'm like 3 years older. So I always told myself, I'll have to wait until she's old enough, right? And then my family left, and I was trying to figure out, how do I go back?
Oh my
Do I go back
gosh.
and join the church again so I can marry this girl? And then I know she doesn't want to stay Amish, so I think she'll leave with me. Like, how far will I have to go for this, right?
Oh my gosh, Luke is scheming.
How did you know I didn't want to stay Amish?
Well, yeah, my sister, you talked a lot with them, and
Yeah,
I'm sure as we were kind
got
of
it.
moving away that y'all had some conversations.
Mhm.
And so I just had this sense that you weren't happy Amish and that I would be like coming back to save you, right?
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Which has actually happened. It has
Mhm.
actually happened, real life stories in the Amish of someone who left and came back and married and then they left together. So the Amish are now very aware of that. They're very protective. Like,
Whoa.
you leave and come back. Like, no, you stay away, right? Don't come back and pretend to be Amish again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Lucy, when you left and you got to your brother's house, we didn't really talk about what it was like acclimating to the outside world or kind of getting your feet under you
Mhm.
again. What was that like?
It was really wild because I had, like I told you, no documentation. So I was limited on what I could do. So I actually started selling products door to door. I started off selling makeup, and then I started selling other things, which is so funny because I had no idea what I was doing. And also, I was very shy. And so it really took me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
But I didn't think so much about how I felt because I had to survive. I had nothing, I had no money. And so I couldn't even buy toothpaste, right? So it was a crazy time, but acclimating, I would say it was really terrifying and also really exciting. I wanted to learn what this new culture, this new world was all about. And so I wanted to experience everything. I went to school. I was very focused on being the best person I could be. So I went to school. I wanted to learn, and I practiced speaking English without my thick German accent and tried to just erase it. So me acclimating to this new culture was really me trying to erase my past and not talk about it, not bring it up. So it was interesting because it took a while, but I'm so grateful for the things that I did do, because it really did start integrating me into this new way of thinking, this new way of communicating. Something that's so strange when you leave a culture like that for me was people my age. I couldn't really connect and join in on conversations that they were having because I had no idea what they were talking about when they talk
culture.
about music.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Pop culture. So for me, that was really hard. And so I took magazines home. I read things. I studied music and artists and really tried to immerse myself into that so that I could understand. And then slowly but surely, I was able to have conversations and know what they were talking about and get more and more comfortable. But being that awkward person where I didn't connect with kids my age, people my age, I realize now it made me so vulnerable and so susceptible to someone coming to me and seeing me and caring about me and really sort of being curious about who I am as an individual. This odd person that's not Amish anymore, but I'm also not English, right? Because that's what we call people who aren't Amish. So I'm not either. I don't fit in anywhere. And it's just this really awkward place to be. I think kind of like being an adolescent where you're not a child, you're not an adult, and you don't really know. You're just awkward. And so that's when I met this woman at Luke's brother's wedding, which is where I felt that sense that she gets me, she understands me. And I was just in hook, line, and sinker. I was so excited to have met someone that understood where I came from and thought that there was something good in me. She saw something, and she encouraged me, which is something I didn't get or wasn't used to getting. So that was really that piece that made me so vulnerable. I was in this space of not belonging anywhere. And I didn't have people in my life at the time that really sort of gave me some direction or guidance. The people in my life at the time would have told me either to go back home, which did happen, back home to my family, meaning, and the other people told me to join this other group, wanted me to be a part of this other group called Charity Fellowship, which I mentioned that I went to very briefly. My brothers were in that church or in that culture community. And so I was either being told to go to the charity group, or go back home to my Amish family. And so I was stuck in a really vulnerable place.
Wait, you said you did go back home again?
I did not.
Oh, good.
I was told
like,
to.
No. No, not again.
Sorry. No, I did not. But I had someone multiple people tell me that I should go back home. It's not right for a girl my age to run away from home and think that I can just create the life that I want. So, especially not for a girl.
Wow. Okay, so simultaneously, Luke, how long had you been in this church before Lucy joined?
So it was about 2 years? Probably 2 years. Yeah. We had just left the Amish, and there was an assistant pastor that we started going to his church. It was our first experience outside of the Amish, going to this non-denominational English church, right? And so that was incredibly exciting. I mean, here's a whole family of, like, at that point, maybe 11, 12 kids were lining up a whole pew, right? And it's like the sensation of the church, like, wow, we got the whole family here, and we're all interested and involved. the youth, the whole family's there, right? It's not something that you really see. The youth are usually off doing their own thing, and get older, you kind of create your own life, right? Well, we were all there. But again, this pastor, craziest thing, but he got into trouble. He was the assistant pastor. He got into trouble with his pastor and got kicked out and invited to a different church. And so I went with him, and that was this church. Hearing new things, I have a huge interest in the Old Testament and just researching, like, where's our faith come? And I love the stories of King David and all those good old stories, right? And they taught that in this church. You never really see the bondage until years later, right? When you look back, like, oh my gosh, it was so dark. It was so heavy.
Let's talk about the mentality of this shift, going from the Amish culture, religiously speaking, to this kind of non-denominational Christian church that you will tell us later why it was so extreme. Was it so fascinating or attractive because they actually encouraged reading of the Bible and encouraged studying the Bible? Because from what I'm aware of, and maybe it wasn't this way in your church, Luke, in your Amish church, but you don't necessarily study the Bible. They just tell you what's in it or tell you what to do.
Yeah. So growing up, my dad always encouraged us to read the Bible. That was, encouraged. So that was great. But yeah, the church, it was just less about the rules and regulations, and it's like you sit in the pew that's comfortable. You're not sitting on that hard back, the hard seat bench for 3 hours straight. You got to sit in a padded pew, and the sermon is interesting and it's inspiring and it's motivating, versus the same old bondage, like, following the rules, and that's what'll get you there, right? You will have favor with God if you do follow all these rules. So just feeling a sense of freedom, of less rules to follow, and still, it's just a different life, right? Different mindset.
Yeah. Is that what it was like for you, Lucy?
Yeah. So a lot of the sermons growing up in the Amish church were about these stories about someone who decided to break the church rules and all these terrible things that happened to them as a result of it. And so it's really a lot of like putting fear in you to think differently or talk about different ideas. That's what our church was like. A lot of the sermons were. It really was not so much Bible teaching as it was sharing examples of people who did something against the church and what God did to them as a result of it. And then also, of course, they would reinforce how important it is for a woman to always have her head covered, and how important it is for men to grow a beard, or for them to, I remember more of the women's rules than the men's rules. You could speak on that a little bit more, but we were just, a lot of focus was actually put on the women and how we behaved and how we dressed and how we conducted ourselves. And we weren't supposed to make eye contact with people, especially not with other men or with someone who wasn't Amish. You were supposed to have a downcast face and your eyes were supposed to be down. And so there was the sermons were really about that, right? So when leaving and going into this new church cult was that no one talked about how we dressed. They didn't care how we dressed. And so in that aspect, it was very different, and it felt good to not have that the topic of conversation all the time. There wasn't any focus put on how we dressed or what our jobs were. They didn't even really speak about like gender roles in general, like women are supposed to be this and men are supposed to be that. So that was like a breath of fresh air for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we'll talk about the ways in which you felt like eventually it was suffocating and not this shiny, happy thing that you thought it was. But first, I just have to know what happened, Luke. When you saw Lucy walk into that church, were you like, what? What is going on? This is the girl of my dreams.
Yeah. Of course, I was scared to talk to her, right? So like she would never have known this, but yeah, I was on the music team. So I think I was like playing guitar and you walked in. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a sign. This is like confirmation. Like,
yeah.
Oh man, it was really cool. Yeah. It was just a really awesome experience to see her walking in and had no idea that she would even, we're an hour away from where she grew up, It's
Yeah.
like a whole different part of the world in a way.
And just this random little church.
Yeah, it's
Very small
crazy.
church.
Yeah.
So how did you approach her? Were you like, hey, remember me? You're not Amish anymore. I'm not Amish anymore. Like, how did this happen?
Oh my gosh. Did I talk to you? I don't know. I might have said
I mean,
hey,
hello,
Lucy.
yes.
Yeah, I said hi.
Yes,
Um,
we greeted each other, but you were very. This would be a good time probably where you could talk about the keep your eyes pure.
oh my gosh, yeah.
That you learned
The
from
Amish have
from
their
your
own
Amish
take
life.
on the purity culture, right? So my dad I never had the sex talk, right? Or you just grow up on the farm, you know how things work, right?
Yeah.
And my dad would never say, he would just say phrases like, guys, keep your eyes pure. And we're like, what does that mean? Right. So if I notice like Lucy, she's a girl, wait, hold up, bud. She's beautiful. Wait, stop. You're not supposed to notice that, right? It's how do you know? What does it mean to keep your eyes pure, right? I could barely allow myself to think about how beautiful she was. And she just shone, right? And I couldn't believe that God would bless me with somebody that I thought was beautiful. No, that, I'm going to get stuck with somebody and I'll be happily married to whoever, right? But to me, I don't think that God's going to give me something like this. And so I had a hard time believing that God, it's his will, right, for us to get married. It's too good I wouldn't want to imagine that, right? But it's really the purity thing. I had a lot of shame around that. And I had a hard time, eye contact with her. I would say hi and kind of move on because I was awkward, very awkward around girls. But yeah, if I had been honest with how I felt, I would have been big hug and, hey, it's good to see you. And I'm so surprised that you're here today. And invite her out the next week for a date. Right.
Yeah.
That would have been great. But no, it was years later. And I was already, at that point, I was already feeling dark inside and just, in my own world, kind of in my own head. Right. So I didn't really get a chance to enjoy that part as much as I would have liked. Yeah.
And Lucy, what are you thinking when you see him? Do you recognize him?
Yeah, I recognize him. I actually knew he was there before I got into the church. The person that I went with, I knew that Luke was there. And so I knew before I saw him. But I was excited. I liked Luke as well. But I wasn't really interested in that part of my life at that moment. I wasn't very interested in getting married or being a housewife, and I was trying to figure out what that would look like because I'm not in the Amish culture anymore. So what would that look like here? And it took me some time to figure that out. But I was excited to be in a church where there was someone else that was from my background. That was actually really cool to me, really encouraging. We did have conversations. You probably don't remember, or maybe you do. We had more conversations as a group with other people, with other friends. But you were already experiencing, like you said, a lot of things had happened that really stole your teenage years from you.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes sense to me that you are so really stuck in that and not able to see beyond it yet at that point. And it's a good thing that we weren't dating at the time because we were both still really trying to figure things out. But
yeah. Do you want to talk about that at all, Luke? Is it relevant to the church, or we don't have to if you don't want to?
Sure. I mean, growing up Amish, when the bishop is the final authority, even I think parents have huge input in their kids' lives, right? And when the bishop overrides that, it kind of just messes things up. So the bishop can change the rules, or often there's the votes that go in. I mean, I think the members will actually vote and the bishop, but the final word goes to the bishop, right? He's the final authority. So if you cross whatever boundaries he set, you're like sinning and you're doing wrong. So naturally, the transition to a church outside of that, the pastor on the stage, he's the one that is honored and respected, and what he says goes, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Couple that with feeling, seeing like we barely express emotions at home, like love or affection. And I think I was like 16 years old before I first hugged my dad. And that's because someone else outside, it's like, hey, Luke, do you ever tell your dad you love him? Or yeah, like, no, that's, it felt a little weird,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or have you ever given your dad a hug? He probably really would like if you did. Like, no, we don't hug, right? It's so awkward. And he encouraged it. And so we started kind of displaying the kind of affection. But I feel like the only time that I ever received affirmation as a kid, I was probably like 15 years old, and my dad asked a question in family devotions, and I answered because I knew the story and I knew the answer. And it's like, Luke, you have wisdom. And it's like, that's the one thing I remember growing up, the one thing that my dad told me that I have hung on to. Okay, I know something. I'm wise. And however, so moving into this new church, this assistant pastor's like, wow, Luke, it's amazing. You have a hunger for God, and saying all the right words, right? Like affirmation, encouragement, edification, all those words in the Bible that are good for healthy relationships. And I was desperately looking for a mentor, somebody who can kind of walk beside me and help me understand how life works. And I'm just a messed up kid with no one to talk to, right? So here's this guy that's, checks all the boxes, and he just speaks into my life and talks about God and all this stuff. I started working for him in a logging company. And, I started seeing the other side of him. He had this deep, dark secret that no one else knows, that he can't tell anyone, but he liked to tell me, but he doesn't feel safe. So I want to be that safe person. I want to be somebody he can confide in, right? I am taking the burden of, I don't know, the relationship and being a friend that he doesn't have, right? And I'm like 20, he's like in his 40s. So looking up to him as a pastor and believing like, okay, he's hearing from God, right? And it just really took a dark turn. A couple of moments that I recall sitting in my car, in my Jeep, and he's just yelling at me at the top of his lungs, right? The spit coming out of his mouth, and he's in my car, and it's probably something very small that I just disagreed with him, and he's just going all over me, right? It's like very traumatic as a probably 19-year-old kid then. That started really taking a toll on my body, and I just started pulling inside and becoming depressed. And so that's kind of the person I was when Lucy saw me again. Like, she knew me when we were still Amish. I was this fun-loving kid for the most part, laughing and making jokes and volleyball games, just making people laugh. I loved it. But now I'm dark, I'm quiet, I'm kind of reserved. And yeah, so it was kind of a seamless transition from the Amish, that kind of control that I was trying to break free of, into this other church where there is very strong control and it feels very familiar,
Right.
and almost comfortable in that, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so common for people when leaving these groups to slip into controlling and abusive and manipulative situations, just like you said, because it's either comfortable or familiar, and it's hard to even know how to break free of something like that. And we've talked about it at length, even just getting into narcissistic or abusive relationships afterwards, because you're used to being pushed down and you're used to submitting in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, no one would blame you for falling into that. And it's so unfortunate that you had to go from one extreme to another without really truly feeling that freedom. And both of you would stay in this church for 10 years, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was that like for you, Lucy? What did you feel? Was it kind of similar where you just felt like this hole was replaced with something else that was familiar in a way?
Yeah. So the thing that was different was that we were really love bombed in the beginning, and I didn't experience love bombing in my life growing up.
Okay.
And I didn't recognize it as that when, I went to this church initially. This was in hindsight. I'm able to see that this love bombing and telling us all these encouraging things about ourselves and giving us this vision that we were a part of this important mission, and we were doing good in the world, and we had information that other people needed to know, and we needed to share it and really just change the world. And God had a special plan for us in that way. And so all of these things that, of course, I wanted to do. I wanted to be a good person. I wanted to do good in my community. And so really that love bombing and affirmation that I never had from any other source, from any other person. And then that just leading into all the control aspects of, in order to be this person, this is what you have to do. And so it went into the control aspect of, this is how much money we have to give to the church. This is how much service we have to do. And in order for us to even be qualified to serve in any capacity, whether that meant cleaning the church, cleaning the restrooms, vacuuming the carpets, there was a special anointing that we needed to do that. And if we were asked to do those things, it was because we had that special anointing. And so it sounds so ridiculous now, but at the time I believed it. I thought, wow, okay. And similar to what Luke said, the authority structure in the church we grew up in, the Amish culture, and also in our homes, was that there was no autonomy. So I had no right to my own opinions or my own life in any capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And then leaving and going into this other church where, again, I have no autonomy, but this person seemed to love me. So it was better because he said nice things to me.
Yeah.
He didn't control certain aspects of like how I dressed or whatever that was. It did end up controlling what we ate. So the control did come down to that. What really pulled me into it was the words and the feeling that I had family, because I had no family. So this was my family, right? And that has such a strong pull on us because we're wired for connection. So it was just that was like my weak spot. And that's what they touched was that weak spot.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this illusion of choice. It seems like, and this is just from my perspective, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm feeling like within the Amish, it's very much controlled by fear and punishment. And it feels like what you're saying is this other group was controlled by reward and praise. And so it feels like you're choosing to clean the toilets, but in reality, you're being manipulated into that choice. So
Exactly.
you're receiving this praise and it's making you feel good and it's making you continue, even though you don't feel necessarily deep down, it doesn't feel good, but you're like, well, it must be good because I'm chosen to clean the toilets, or I'm special, or I'm doing the right thing. And that's almost a more dangerous situation to be in when you are oppressing yourself because you don't necessarily realize that you're still being manipulated and controlled. You think that you're free, you think that you've left the control, but it has a stronger hold on you because you don't realize you're being controlled.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
very well said.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong. We love to serve. You know, we grew up around hospitality, and so we were willing to work, but we were sometimes the only ones working. And you know, imagine the church. Like we were we were like, it had to be awesome for us to show up because we worked so hard and we did so much. And and we, you know, anytime there was an event or somebody needed food or serving, we were there. And so we were like a like a gift to the church, you know?
Yeah.
I love to cook, and I didn't actually learn how to cook in my Amish home. A lot of people assume that I did, but I didn't. I learned to cook from watching Food Network, and namely Gordon Ramsay. I love watching his shows, and so I learned to cook from watching him. But I love to cook. It's a passion of mine. And so in this church, we would cook every weekend. We'd always have a lunch after the church service and everyone got to stay. And Luke and I would be up until 2, 3 in the morning making the lunch for the next day. And other pet people would come and bring to-go boxes so that they could take leftovers home that we made.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it was flattering because they liked my food, so they wanted to take it home with them. But there was just this feel in this like environment where we were so obviously being used. And that little bit of encouragement that we got from it somehow made us just be okay with that or to not speak up. We were just newly married, and so finances were tight for us. We were just both starting our careers. I was starting in medical, and he was going to school and working in retail. We didn't have a lot of income, but we were giving 30% of our income to the church.
Whoa.
And plus still cooking all this food on our own dime. And anytime something needed to be done at the church where it needed to be fixed or like a leaking roof or whatever, we all had to chip in and pay for that.
Wow.
And so none of our money that we actually gave to the church was being allocated for any maintenance or anything like that. So it was just a situation where we were giving away so much just for like words of encouragement and affirmation that came at such a high price.
Right. Tell me what you think it was at this church, why this church was so problematic. Was it the guy at the top who was just hoarding all of this money and wanted power and control? Was it the teachings that were problematic? Was it all of the above? Kind of paint us a picture as to the things that they were making you do aside from the physical labor.
Some of the teaching, I would say, was definitely problematic, especially the idea that we understood the Bible in a way that other people didn't. And so, again, there was this elitist mentality that I also had that was prevalent in the Amish culture, that we are so sorry that you don't know what we know. And it was just so gross. But that mentality was definitely there. And so that bled into whatever we did, including the teaching, including the twist that was put on the Bible and the teachings in there, including what we ate. And it was not that the advice to not eat certain things was like bad advice. It might be advice that a doctor might give me too and say, like, don't eat those things or limit how much you eat. But it was the idea that we were expected to do that. And if you didn't, then you were talked about and you were shamed for that. And so it was, again, not something that we could just choose to do of our own free will. It was expected. And like you asked about the guy at the top being bad. Yes, there was no board he had no accountability at all. And again, I didn't even at the time understand. I'm in my early 20s at the time. I didn't even know that churches are supposed to have that. I didn't know how churches are supposed to function as far as outside of our Amish culture. So I didn't know that there was a structure supposed to be in place that had a level of accountability for each person in a leadership position. So there was none of that in this church. There was no board. He made all the decisions. He kept all the money. There was things like funds were raised for someone struggling in the church. There was 2 families in particular that we know of that they were struggling and to pay their bills, and he took up offerings for these families, and they never got the money. And it was one of those things where these were good people, good families, and everyone loved them. And so they gave generously, and they never got the money, and they were afraid to speak up. They were afraid to say, like, we didn't even get this offering. And so Luke and I found out about that. And so when we would give money, we would just give it straight to them. We wouldn't give it through the church. And then that was also, there was comments made about that we shouldn't be doing that. You should be putting it in the offering plate so that you can keep track of what you gave and get a tax write-off. And we were like, no, we're just going to give it right to them.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things like that.
But then you told me off camera about the tax situation.
Mm-hmm. There was no 501c3. We found out later. And so there was donations being taken illegally, essentially. And there was no record for us to even record what we gave. He never gave us that. So
I mean, he did, but it was always like months. Like I would ask him, hey, our taxes are due.
yeah.
Could I have a letter? And it would take forever, right?
So we would just do our taxes
Yeah.
without it.
Yeah.
But, so the IRS never had that information. It would be kind of interesting if the IRS did a little bit of digging
Yeah.
there.
Great.
Yeah. Does this group still exist?
Yes.
So this guy is still out there just taking people's money?
Yeah.
So interesting. We felt like there was some sort of vindication, right? Because when we moved from Michigan to Texas in 2014, someone had complained to the TV network that he was on, because he was on national television, had his own show, health show, and I actually spoke with the attorney from that network, and they called several days later, said, just so you know, because of your statement, we have removed him from the network. And so that funding, all that was cut off, right? So that was like,
That's
yes,
awesome.
somebody, it was my first experience of feeling that somebody has my back and that my words are valid, that I have something to say, and that I'm worth standing up for, right? That was really a cool feeling.
Yeah.
So that really took a lot of, I guess, the influence that he had. And he really used his platform as an international televangelist to lure people into the church and to build credibility for himself from that aspect. And so the network was contacted by someone who stated that, that Luke could corroborate his story, and ultimately it led to an interrogation or an investigation of him on the network, and they determined that he was lying, and they removed him, and they removed his show and everything. Every future show was taken off. So there was that. And so there was this time span of, I don't know, almost maybe 8 years, 7 or 8 years, where we didn't see or hear from anyone from there, because we cut off contact with anyone that was still there at this church. And so when we left, but he is since back and is on social media, and somebody let us know that he's on social media. And so he's still doing the things.
So what was it then, Lucy, that you started realizing, hey, this isn't a good environment for me and I need to get out of this?
What really opened my eyes more fully. So I'm going to back up a little bit, because there was a lot of fear put in us to speak against the leader. One of the things that he would use as an example in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where somebody spoke against the leader, Moses, and God punished them by having them and their whole family and clan swallowed into the earth, into this big earthquake. And he used that to basically let us know that if we did that, we were in danger of this kind of punishment. And again, like the Amish church did, he would use examples of people who went against his teaching, who left the church, and these are the terrible things that happened to them. And so it's just, he used the same playbook. But the other thing that was added onto that aspect of it was that he indirectly threatened people with lawsuits, defamation, if they ever said anything against him. And so there was a lot of fear to speak against him. He even said that God told him things that we said in our own bedrooms and in our own homes, and that nothing was kept secret from him, that whatever we said to each other in our own home, that God was going to tell him that we said these things.
Whoa.
And oh my gosh, I mean, seriously, Lucy, when she started expressing, I mean, she has some pretty strong words expressing herself sometimes, right? Like in her home growing up, they would just they would use the right words for the situation, right? Me, I would sugarcoat everything, but the fear, the terror that I felt when she like addressed this, like he's a liar. I think those are the very words you said. He's a liar. I was like, babe, don't say that.
You're like, shh, he can hear
God's
us.
going to show him, right? freaked me right out, right? That's how strong that control and the feeling of fear was.
Yeah.
Like, I genuinely believe if I was sitting there talking to him and I felt like maybe he's lying or I had an impression, I would like block my mind or think about something else because I was afraid that God was going to show him what I was thinking, that I might be questioning something he's saying.
Yeah. That was very scary to think that what we said in private was spoken to him. And from the very beginning, he set himself up as a man of God and told us stories about how God spoke to him when he was 6 years old, and how his own mother would come to him and consult him for information that God would give him to answer questions that she had. And so he was the man of God, and he knew everything, and no one could ever touch him. We would never in a million years be able to achieve the level of spirituality that he had or access that he had to God. And so he just really set himself up as this person on a pedestal that would always be closer to God than you were, than anyone else.
Right.
And it was interesting because anytime, if there was someone eligible for a promotion, like inside the church, like let's say, he started being pastor, and the this couple that was beneath him, they were the ministers. Well, they needed to be promoted to pastors, so he promoted himself to bishop. Self-appointed bishop of the church, and they were now pastors, and then that would leave space for someone to become a minister, right? So he would gradually make that ascent on his own without anyone else officiating that little ceremony, right? Like, he just announced, like, I'm now a bishop, basically, and these are my pastors, right?
Right.
Yeah, and you had asked about what happened that sort of got us to leave or got me to open my eyes. And there was a female leader in the church that I had some conflict with. And the conflict was started by me saying that I couldn't do something that she asked me to do. And really, it just was something very simple and not a big deal, something that any normal person would be like, okay, well, you can't commit to that. That's okay. But in this environment, that was not okay for me to say that I didn't have the capacity to take on another commitment. And the reason that we were so deeply involved in the work that happened there was the physical labor, the financial side of like supplying finances to get things done, is because one of the leaders would say that if you don't mow the lawn this week, it's because you don't love Jesus. And just all these manipulative phrases, and it was so bad. But I didn't want to be seen as someone who doesn't love Jesus. I didn't want to be seen as someone who is like selfish or uncaring. That's not my nature. And so I would just go to the lengths to try to be that good person. And when I said I couldn't take on this commitment, the reason that I had really the courage to say no was because I had hired a counselor, and I was talking to a counselor. And so again, I'm going to step back and say, like, we were very discouraged from ever seeking outside counsel or outside help. If we needed help in our marriage or in any relationship in our life, we would have to come to the church and bring that to the church. We were actually flat out told that it's unsafe and unwise for us to listen to podcasts or read certain books, which is so typical in cults, right?
Yep,
to
information control.
not be allowed. Yes, information control was very strong there. And also giving us books to read that he wanted us to read. And so I had hired a counselor, and I didn't tell them that I had a counselor. And so she was slowly leading me into this idea that I didn't have to do what they said, that I could decide what I wanted to do. And so I said no, and that created a big problem between her and I. And we worked very closely together as far as we spoke almost daily through text or something, or through email, to talk about the projects that we were doing for the church, because there was always something. We put so many hours a week of work in after our jobs to make this thing work, and all free labor. So when I said no, it created a big problem. And she stopped talking to me. She didn't text me. So here I am being abandoned again. I'm like being shunned again and being rejected again, like I was when I left the Amish church, when I left my family. And it was so painful to be just discarded like that. And the sermons on weekends from the head pastor, from the leader, had to do with what was going on between her and I, and also between her and other people, because there was also other people having problems with her. And the sermons were very shaming and condemning and saying that you better go make it right. You need to figure this out. You guys are like the church. We can't even move forward with our mission and our vision because you are holding it up by not. It was so bad. And in that time frame, I got pregnant. Luke and I were married for almost like 7.5 years when I got pregnant, and something shifted in me. I just think that it was my daughter. She opened my eyes to see that I didn't want to raise her in that environment. So I was pregnant, probably about 2 months pregnant, when I just wrote a letter to the church and I said I wasn't coming back. And I left, and that was the end of it. I mean, I didn't hear from them. They never responded to me, which I didn't want to hear from them. But
Whoa.
I told Luke that I can't go anymore. And that's one of the things that I really always loved about him, is how supportive he was, because I know how conflicting it was for him at the time.
Yeah.
But he supported me. He's like, you don't have to go. And so I quit going. And a couple months later, you also quit going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
I still had kind of a relationship with the church when I left. I was the nice one in the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I did feel a lot of guilt because I saw her being verbally assaulted, and I didn't stand up for her. And that is horrible, as a husband, knowing that I backed down and I respected this pastor. I felt I didn't have a right to confront this pastor for the way she spoke to my wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Step in and have her back.
It was similar to, the Amish structure,
Mm-hmm.
the authority structure, where
Yeah.
the pastor has the final say, the buck stops
Mm-hmm.
there, and you don't dare speak up,
Mm-hmm.
even for your family member, your spouse or your child or whatever. If they're being abused, you don't get to have a say in that.
So I'm sorry, but today, listen, as parents, we are the head of this home. And
Mm-hmm.
no pastor or no self-proclaimed authority or even authority set up in church we go to has a right to step in and verbally assault or misuse us.
Mm-hmm.
As a child of God, we have equal footing in the kingdom of God as the pastor on the stage.
Yeah.
So thank God, I became better after that experience. And I was scolded by a mentor that I had then as well. Like, you totally didn't stand up for her, and you should have had her back.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, in a sense, it was like impossible for you to do that. It would have been impossible for either of us
Mm-hmm.
to do that. When you are so controlled and manipulated and you have no voice, how can you speak up on someone's behalf? And so, yeah, it took time to leave and to just not go be a part of any community, which is essentially what we did for an entire decade. We sort of locked ourselves into our own life and started to unravel everything that we learned, all the programming and the conditioning to believe things that were not our own ideas or thoughts or opinions. And because whatever you believe, you're supposed to come by that honestly, right? On your own.
Mm-hmm.
What it is that you choose to believe, that's such a big part of being a healthy human being, is to have the autonomy to choose what you believe.
Yeah.
And so we took that back. We took
Mm-hmm.
back our ability to choose, and it was the first time we had it in our lives.
Yeah.
So it was a beautiful thing to just be our own family and not have someone controlling us and telling us how to live our lives in any capacity.
Oh my gosh, it was so incredibly freeing and like not going to church when we're supposed to be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like a little sense of guilt, but then along with that is like this freedom, like, oh my gosh, we just left church where we went to find God. We left church and we found God right here in our little
Mm-hmm.
family, right? The two of
Yeah.
us. So that was really powerful for the first time in our lives, that realizing that we can have a relationship with God completely independent of any church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, I get it. Go hang out with people who are serious about following God. Hang out with people who are serious about growing. Be
Mm-hmm.
around that, right? But for a
Mm-hmm.
time, just pulling back, and even though we were alone, we weren't. It was so freeing for us, and that
Yeah.
was like the start of, I think, the start of healing from even the Amish days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, before you keep going, I just have to pause and give you guys some props because I just love listening to you both go back and forth and see how well adjusted and how you've really done the work in unwinding your programs because I'm hearing you Luke, say, "Oh, I was so guilty for not stepping up and I didn't step up." And then Lucy's like, "Yeah, but you couldn't have." And it was just like such a healthy back and forth. I was just like, yes, this is great.
Right,
Because I was going
right,
to say the same thing of like, you did the best that you could with the tools and the information
right.
that you had. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ultimately, you did leave a few months after your wife was like, "Hey, I can't do this anymore." So even just taking that leap because you were so much under the control of the manipulation and the brainwashing, and you essentially sacrificed your salvation to side with your wife. And I think that's
Yeah,
amazing. At least that's
Mm-hmm.
probably how it felt was,
Sure.
okay, but if
exactly.
I
Yeah.
leave,
Right,
like, then what? So I
Yeah.
just think
exactly.
it's
Yeah.
so amazing that both of you chose each other and you chose love and you figured out
Mm-hmm.
what works for you and your family and what you wanted for your kids, how you wanted to raise them. And you've clearly found this beautiful place where you feel connected to God or a higher power, and you feel like, hey, we don't need to follow all of these rules. There's no checklist, we're just happy and clearly in love. And I think all of that just makes you even better parents.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, I think that the important thing about when you find community, because we are wired for connection, we're wired for relationship, every human being, and so for us to now approach building friendships, building community here locally or wherever we are, because we do have that strong sense that we want to have community, we want to be a part of something that is healthy. And what I'm seeing now is that when you go through this process of, for us to go through this process of sort of deconstructing everything that we were taught and just taking it all apart and finding our healing and the embodiment of who we are as a person, that we are a whole person, and that we had to connect with our own physical bodies in order to be able to heal the traumas, heal all of the things that happened and that were out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
So approaching community now from this embodied perspective is so different there, because there's just natural boundaries in place, there's natural protections that we have, that help us to not go back into something unhealthy. Because for a long time, of course, that was a fear that we had. Like, we don't want to get stuck back in that community. And then before we know it, we're like trauma bonded to people and we can't get out, or we don't want that to happen to our kids. That was really the big thing for us, was our kids. Like, we were like, we don't want our kids to end up in that sort of environment. So, we had to teach ourselves and our kids that you always push back against ideas and ideologies and whatever it is. Like, you think for yourself, and pushback is healthy. You're supposed to push back, and you're supposed to invite people to push back on your ideas. That's how you get smarter. That's how you learn, is by giving push and pull, and never ever does someone have authority over you in that way where they get to make decisions for you. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. Autonomy is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And even as someone, all of these churches that we were in, they preached Bible, they preached that sort of the idea that the Bible is the ultimate authority or whatever. They didn't live like it was, but that's what they taught. But the Bible actually encourages autonomy. And so that was so important for me to see that and to realize, like, this is no one has a right ever to take that, to cross that boundary of taking away your ability to choose for yourself and come to your own conclusions. And so for me now, living in that space of nuance and moving away from radical thinking, black and white thinking, dogmatic theologies and ideas. I don't know, maybe there's a place for those things, but not really in my life at this moment. I find that I really find so much more peace living in nuance, and there's not a lot in life that is black or white. There's a lot of gray. And so just understanding that, and that is where your autonomy lives, is in that nuance as a unique person. And so being able to live in that space myself and us and our kids, and teaching them that, is like almost feels like it's impossible. It feels like a miracle that we can do that because of where we come from and because of what we've experienced.
Yeah, that's amazing. Anything to add to that, Luke?
No, I think you did really well.
Yes, this is so great. So then, where are you now? What makes both of you feel happy and at peace? Did you find that community that's not a cult?
Very cautiously. Right.
Yeah, so something that we actually are passionate about is hospitality. And so because of how I grew up, because of how we grew up, I didn't want to have anything to do with hospitality or serving people, because that's all we were forced to do. And we were never, serving people in my past experience was like the lowest position that you can have in society. And it meant that you were nobody. And so I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I was like, no, I'm not ever going to be in hospitality. But interestingly, that's actually what we feel really passionate about. And so we have taken our ability to entertain. We love entertaining and hosting. And so we have taken that passion and turned it into something good that's beautiful and healthy. And instead of being forced into a position of having to serve people, we create spaces where people can get together and tell their stories. And I think that is sort of our rebellion against what we were taught, in a sense, because we're taking this idea that serving and hospitality is beautiful and it's important, and it's a place where people can find themselves. And so we do that a lot, and we are starting to do it more, even on a larger scale in our community, creating dinners and banquets.
Wow.
And inviting people to come and share their stories and just be together in that way, where there's not, everybody coming from the same place, but there's people from all backgrounds and different walks of life. And it's not this clique sort of environment, but it's something beautiful. So moving away from dogmatic ways of thinking, because that's how we were so steeped in our childhood and all of our life in church, even after we got married. And is that this idea that the opposite of dogmatism isn't relativism. And people get afraid of that when you talk about not having this black and white way of thinking, because so many of us are taught to think that way, even when it comes to politics or religion or anything, right? We have this like dogmatic way of thinking, and this is what's right and that's wrong. And so we don't really engage our own mind to really think through things. But the opposite of being dogmatic isn't saying that I have no morals or I have no compass guiding me. It's just simply the ability to listen to other people's stories and having that curiosity that I want to know your story, and it's important and it's valid, and it's, and sharing our stories with each other is what actually ultimately heals us. And so going into what you do, I want to tell you this because I've watched some of your other shows, and that's what is happening in people's brains as they're telling you their story. You're listening to them and you're attuned to them, and it really is healing to do that. And so thank you for creating this space where you are giving people that opportunity, because it is so important. And I'm very appreciative of you. And I think that you're beautiful, and what you do is beautiful. So,
Oh,
yeah.
thank you. That's so sweet. Well, I feel privileged that people feel safe enough to share their stories with me because essentially I'm a stranger and I just call these people up. I'm like, hey, you want to tell me the darkest things that have ever happened to you? Great, see you tomorrow. I'm sure it's really nerve-wracking and I try to make it as comfortable as possible, but that's essentially what happens because I don't really know these people before they come on. So I feel really grateful that people are willing to do that and that I can be this conduit for something greater because just watching this channel grow has been so amazing and it shows that there really is a need for it. But I feel like, I wouldn't have a show if it weren't for the people coming on and sharing. So I just feel like I'm such a small piece of it and I'm so grateful to be a part of it. So the thanks coming back to you guys for being willing to share your stories and be on and provide insight for people. It's really helpful.
For sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love that you're creating spaces like that for people. And it's funny because Jonathan and I think about it all the time. We're like, okay, how do we find a community that's not a cult? So you just answered that, which is create your own. Because if you create it, you know the inner workings and you know there's nothing nefarious going on behind the scenes and you can kind of monitor that and make sure it stays a safe place and doesn't get out of control with the power dynamic or people having ulterior motives. So, all right. That's awesome.
And they're all from different churches, right? Most of the people we invited didn't know each other, hadn't met each other before that evening, right? So, we just prepared this feast and we invited them into the space and then created kind of a story to enjoy the meal with. Go through the story, enjoy the meal, and then, wide table with all this food down the middle and wine and good conversation and encouraging that, right? It was really beautiful. And what perfect picture of how those of us who are expecting the Last Supper or the supper in heaven with our Messiah, right? The experience of sitting together in a safe environment and sharing your story with a stranger across the table. It's beautiful. And that happens, I think it happens more quickly when you have people of different churches and you kind of just break down those walls and say, hey, we're all here to experience this event together. We don't know each other's backgrounds. I mean, it creates that safe space.
Because then you have all these different ideas and you have the pushback of like, I've never thought of it that way, or I don't really agree with that.
Yeah.
Because we need that as human beings. If we are always told yes to our ideas and thoughts and opinions, we're not going to end up being very healthy. And also it's not healthy to do that to someone, right? It's healthy to say, like, I can see your point, but I don't really feel that same way,
Yeah.
So just giving that healthy pushback to ideas and thoughts, because we all see the world through our own lens, and it's important for us to be told that our lens aren't the only lens to look through and see the world. So I think, that community that has that diversity in background and thought and opinions and the way that they practice even their faith is so important.
I agree. What part of the world are you in? You said Texas?
Yes.
Yeah, we are near Austin. We're in Central Texas.
So it sounds like we need to do a Cults to Consciousness meetup, and I'll pay you to do the whole spread.
Let's do it.
Totally.
That would be so awesome.
We'd have such a party. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm like, man, this sounds great, but like the cooking part is not for me. Like, you guys do that part and we'll fund it, and then we can show up and have great conversations.
That would be amazing.
Sounds fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been so great. I'm so glad you guys are willing to come on together as a couple. We don't do the 2-person interviews often, but I feel like we need to do more of them because it's so interesting seeing both perspectives and hearing, the inner thoughts of each other, husband and wife. So do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I guess a little bit. I just want to say for Lucy, like, she's always been curious in her life, and I think it's added so much power, and that's why she is so free today, because she has so much curiosity about the world, and she's willing to ask the hard questions and ask herself those hard questions. But she just has this incredible fortitude, right? I mean, she went at it alone, leaving home, unprotected, even my family, who should have been a safe, welcoming environment for her to step into and feel a sense of safety, she was betrayed by them, right? And so she's been this incredibly strong person that has just fought back, tooth and nail. I really respect that, and just want to give a shout out for the hard work that she has done.
Oh,
Just sitting
Thank
and
you.
listening to her story for myself, I feel emotional because it's just really powerful, and it's such a good story of healing and growth. Yeah. So thank you for
Thank you.
giving her that space. It's just really, really inspiring.
Thanks, honey.
Got it.
that was the sweetest thing I've ever heard. I don't know if Lucy told you about a Linda Listen, but if you have another statement, I feel like your Linda Listen would be like, Linda Listen, stay curious. But if you
Mhm.
have something else, it's basically, I don't know if you saw that viral video with the toddler that's like, Linda, listen.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Right.
So
right.
for us, I think it's a fun way to say something sassy to the people, the Lindas who have held us down, and we're just like trying to get our voices out there. Or people like to do things a little bit more inspirational sometimes too. So do you have a Linda Listen, Luke?
You go for it.
I had my Linda Listen last time.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you have to do another one. I forgot to tell you that too.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll bring out the Linda.
Oh, me, I
Listen
have to do
then.
another
You
one?
both
Okay.
need to do one. Yeah, I forgot to
Okay.
tell you. You got to come up with another one
All right.
on the spot.
Oh, right now, right
On the
right
spot
now.
right
Oh, you
now.
go first. You're pretty good.
Linda Listen. Community is about being with people that care about each other and don't care about controlling each other. They're not interested in controlling each other. It's about being with people that you can eat good food with, drink wine, and have a great time, and you can be all of yourself.
Yes, if they try to control you, you might be in a cult.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. And I would be like, all right, who's Linda's? Is it Linda, or can I name
Linda
a Tom?
Listen.
Or
Linda Listen.
Okay,
It's definitely
okay.
Linda.
all right, so mine would be like, Linda, listen. Don't beat yourself up for your past. Those times that you look back and you have regrets and you feel like you failed in so much. Show some care. Show some love towards that younger self that didn't understand, didn't know. The more you criticize and beat yourself up, the slower your healing comes. So give yourself some space and take a breath and give yourself some grace, and take a few minutes just to reflect that you have grown to this point, and just take a break, and let's keep going, with grace towards your younger self. Yeah.
That was perfect. So you didn't need time to prepare. You got
All right,
it.
thank
Both of
you,
you
thank you.
nailed it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been fantastic. Guys, if you want to connect with them, you can check out Instagram. Lucy's handle is Lucinda Koblenz. We'll put it in the description below. And anything else before we go? I think that was
That was
is
it.
that
That was it.
everything?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So leave those words of encouragement down below in the comments. They mean so much to us and our guests who do read them, and it helps boost the algorithm, of course. If you want to support the podcast further, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness, or we have some merch at cults2consciousness.com. If you like this video, definitely check out our Amish and Mennonite playlist. We have some incredible stories there. We also have a new sister channel where we are just doing 8 to 10 minute clips of our previous interviews. So if you want to see some shorter form content, or maybe see content that you may have missed to go watch the longer form, you can do that too at Cults to Consciousness Clips. And if you like this video, I'll link to more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.